The single farmer rejected everyone until the beautiful woman asked, "Fear of love or fear of loss?" Ahmed woke up to the soft sound of roosters crowing as the first light of dawn broke over the small village. The air was fresh, carrying the faint scent of earth and grass, a smell that had been part of his life for as long as he could remember. He stretched his arms, feeling the stiffness from yesterday's work, and glanced out of the small wooden window of his modest home. The fields beyond glistened with dew, the crops standing tall and proud under the early morning sun. To many, it was just another day, but to Ahmed, it was a day of routine, comfort, and quiet solitude. Ahmed was a farmer, like his father and grandfather before him. He worked hard, tending to his crops and animals, rising before most people in the village and sleeping only after making sure everything was in order. His life was simple, almost predictable, and he liked it that way. The villagers often whispered about him, saying he was the most dependable man around, but also one of the loneliest. They said he had no interest in marrying anyone, and that he had rejected countless proposals over the years. As Ahmed walked through his fields, inspecting the crops, his mind wandered back to those moments when people had tried to enter his life. Women from nearby villages, and even from his own, had come forward with smiles and hopeful eyes, each one offering a glimpse of what life with him could be. But Ahmed had always said no. Some people called him proud, others said he was stubborn, and a few even whispered that he was unlucky in love. The truth, however, was more complicated than any gossip. Ahmed had known love once, a long time ago, before the heartbreak that had changed him. It was brief but intense, a relationship filled with hope and laughter, with dreams of building a life together. But it had ended in betrayal, leaving him with wounds deeper than he had ever imagined. Since then, he had built walls around his heart, telling himself that it was safer to live alone than to risk losing someone he cared about. Love had become a dangerous word in his mind, something that could bring both joy and unbearable pain. Despite the loneliness that sometimes crept into his thoughts during quiet evenings, Ahmed found comfort in his work. The farm was his sanctuary. Each morning, he would feed the animals, check the irrigation, and walk through his fields, examining the growth of each crop. There was a sense of pride in seeing his efforts bear fruit, a reward that required no promises or assurances from anyone else. His days were full, his hands calloused, and his heart guarded, and that was enough for him, or so he thought. On this particular morning, the village was preparing for the annual harvest festival, a celebration that brought everyone together after months of hard work in the fields. The festival was lively, with music, dancing, and the aroma of fresh bread and roasted meat filling the air. Children ran around, their laughter echoing across the village, and neighbors greeted each other warmly, exchanging news and stories. Ahmed usually avoided the festival, preferring the quiet of his farm over the crowded festivities. But this year, he found himself walking along the edge of the village square, curious about the preparations. As he watched from a distance, Ahmed noticed familiar faces. There was Mrs. Khan, the baker, arranging her trays of sweet pastries, young boys chasing each other with wooden swords pretending to be warriors, and the elders seated in a circle, sharing stories from years gone by. Everyone seemed to have a role, a place in the tapestry of village life, and Ahmed felt a twinge of longing. He had spent so many years observing from the sidelines, never fully participating in the social rhythm that connected the villagers. Ahmed's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden sound of laughter, different from the usual chatter of the village. It was bright and clear, carrying a warmth that made him pause. He turned and saw a group of visitors arriving from a nearby town, a few women and men who had come to join the festival. Among them was a woman who immediately caught his attention. She moved with grace and confidence, her eyes observing everything around her with interest and curiosity. Unlike others who had approached him in the past with flattery or bold words, she seemed natural, unpretentious, and genuinely intrigued by the life of the village. Ahmed felt an unfamiliar sensation in his chest, a spark of curiosity that he hadn't experienced in years. He quickly looked away, reminding himself that he was a man who had built his life around solitude. He had no need for complications, no desire to open his heart to anyone again. Yet, there was something about the woman that lingered in his thoughts. Her presence was calm but compelling, like a gentle breeze that could shift even the heaviest leaves. As the day went on, Ahmed continued his work, but he couldn't shake the memory of her laughter and the way she had observed the farm with genuine interest. He noticed her talking to villagers, asking questions about the crops, the animals, and the traditions of the harvest. She wasn't imposing or judgmental. She seemed to care, to want to understand, and that intrigued him. Ahmed had never met anyone who approached life with such openness and sincerity. By midday, the festival was in full swing. Stalls lined the square, filled with homemade goods, fruits, and vegetables. Music played in the background as villagers danced in circles, clapping their hands and stamping their feet. Ahmed stayed on the outskirts, watching, a part of him longing to join, yet his pride and caution holding him back. He had always been the observer, the one who preferred to keep his distance, but today, something felt different. It was in the late afternoon, while he was checking the irrigation system near the edge of his fields, that the woman approached him. She had a basket in her hand, filled with fresh herbs and vegetables she had collected from other farms. She stopped a few feet away, smiled, and greeted him warmly. Her voice was calm, friendly, and carried a sense of ease that made Ahmed feel slightly unsteady. "Hello," she said softly. "I've been watching you work. You're very skilled." Ahmed nodded, unsure of how much he should say. Compliments were not new to him, but there was something in her tone that felt genuine, not rehearsed or superficial. "Thank you," he replied simply. "Farming is hard work, but it's worth it." She looked around, taking in the fields, the animals, and the small wooden house. "It's beautiful here. You must love this life," she said, her eyes meeting his for a brief moment. Ahmed felt a twinge of vulnerability. It had been so long since someone had looked at him this way, not with judgment or expectation, but with interest and understanding. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. Instead, he nodded again, letting the silence speak for him. She smiled, tilting her head slightly as if she understood more than he was saying. Then, in a voice that was gentle yet direct, she asked a question that made Ahmed freeze. "Fear of love or fear of loss?" The words hung in the air, simple yet profound. Ahmed blinked, unsure how to respond. No one had ever asked him such a question before. People had tried to charm him, flatter him, or coax him into conversation, but no one had ever challenged him so directly, so deeply. He felt a mixture of curiosity, caution, and something he hadn't felt in a long time, interest. Ahmed looked down at his hands, calloused and strong from years of labor. He thought about his past, the heartbreak that had shaped him, and the walls he had built around his heart. He thought about the quiet evenings, the empty house, and the solitary meals he had grown used to. And yet, despite all of that, her question lingered in his mind, planting a seed of reflection that he couldn't ignore. For the first time in many years, Ahmed felt a shift within him. The familiar comfort of solitude was still there, but it was accompanied by a new sensation, a quiet curiosity about what could be if he allowed himself to trust again. He didn't know who she was or why she had come to the village, but something about her presence made him pause and reconsider the life he had so carefully constructed. As the sun dipped lower, casting golden light across the fields, Ahmed returned to his home. He carried with him not just the fatigue of the day, but a flutter of thoughts and questions he had never allowed himself to consider. Who was this woman? Why had she asked that question? And most importantly, what did he truly feel about love and loss? The evening air was cool and still, and Ahmed sat by the small wooden fence, staring at the horizon. The village was alive with celebration in the distance, but he felt detached yet strangely connected. Something had shifted, a gentle nudge in the direction of possibilities he had long avoided. For the first time in a long time, Ahmed wondered if there could be more to life than routine, more to his heart than pain, and more to the world than the solitary path he had chosen. And as darkness fell over the village, Ahmed didn't yet know the answer to the question that had touched him so deeply. But he knew one thing: this harvest festival, this day, and this woman had stirred something inside him that would not be easily forgotten. The next morning, Ahmed woke up with a lingering thought of the woman from the festival. Her question, simple yet piercing, echoed in his mind. Fear of love or fear of loss? He shook his head, trying to push it away. He had lived his life focused on the farm, on the crops, on the animals, and on keeping to himself. Love had always seemed like a dangerous path, one that could only bring heartbreak. And yet, the memory of her bright eyes, her gentle smile, and her natural curiosity made him wonder if maybe there was more to life than the solitude he had embraced for so many years. He went about his morning chores as usual, feeding the animals and inspecting the fields. But even as he worked, his thoughts kept drifting back to her. The village was buzzing with preparations for the festival's main day, and Ahmed noticed how the villagers spoke excitedly about the visitors. Most of them were curious about the strangers, sharing what they had seen and heard. But Ahmed was different. He was silently observing, paying attention not to the gossip, but to the way she had moved, the way she had interacted with people, and the way she had seemed genuinely interested in life on the farm. As the sun rose higher in the sky, Ahmed heard soft footsteps approaching the edge of his fields. He looked up and saw her walking towards him, carrying a small basket filled with fresh produce. Her smile was calm, friendly, and unpretentious, and Ahmed felt an unfamiliar warmth in his chest. He wanted to greet her, to speak, but the words caught in his throat. For the first time, he wasn't sure how to act around someone who didn't treat him as someone to impress but as a person to understand. "Good morning," she said softly, her voice carrying across the rows of crops. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." Ahmed shook his head. "Not at all," he replied, his voice quieter than usual. She placed her basket down and looked around, her eyes scanning the fields, the animals, and the small wooden house. "Your farm is beautiful," she said. "It must take a lot of dedication to keep it looking like this." Ahmed shrugged modestly. "It's hard work, but it's part of life," he said. He wasn't used to receiving compliments, especially ones that seemed sincere rather than polite. She crouched down to inspect the soil near the edge of the field. "I've never really understood farming before," she said. "But seeing it up close, I can see how much skill and patience it requires. You must know your land very well." Ahmed found himself nodding, surprised that he was enjoying the conversation. Most people would have grown bored or distracted, but she listened, asked questions, and seemed genuinely interested in learning. There was no pressure, no hidden agenda, just curiosity and respect. Over the next few hours, she stayed with him, helping where she could. She gathered herbs, picked vegetables, and even assisted in feeding the animals. Ahmed found it strange at first to let someone into his daily routine, but he couldn't deny that her presence made the work feel lighter, almost enjoyable. Her laughter was easy and natural, not forced, and it had a way of brightening even the quiet moments on the farm. As they worked side by side, she asked about his life, not in the way strangers usually did, but with a thoughtful and genuine interest. "Have you always lived here?" she asked. Ahmed nodded. "Yes, my family has been here for generations. I grew up working the fields just like my father and grandfather before me," she smiled. "It must be comforting to be so connected to the land." There's something honest about it, something that can't be found in cities or towns. Ahmed felt a small smile tug at the corner of his lips. She had a way of seeing things he had never thought to share with anyone. Most people only saw a farmer doing his work, but she noticed the rhythm, the patience, and the care in everything he did. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, they took a short break under the shade of a large tree near the edge of the field. She offered him some water, and he accepted, feeling a warmth from her simple gesture. They sat in silence for a few moments, listening to the gentle rustle of leaves and the distant sounds of the village. The silence was comfortable, not awkward, and Ahmed realized he hadn't felt such ease with anyone in years. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but direct. "Ahmed, can I ask you something?" He looked at her, curious. "Of course," he said cautiously. "Why do you keep people at a distance?" she asked. Her eyes were kind but searching, looking for an answer he wasn't sure he could give. Ahmed hesitated. No one had ever asked him that question before. People had tried to charm him, persuade him, or judge him, but no one had asked why he behaved this way. The memory of past heartbreak surfaced, sharp and clear, reminding him why he had built walls around his heart. "It's complicated," he said finally, choosing his words carefully. "I've been hurt before. I don't want to risk being hurt again." She nodded thoughtfully. "I understand," she said gently, "but sometimes the fear of loss can keep us from finding something beautiful. Don't you think it's worth the risk?" Ahmed was silent. He had spent so many years convincing himself that solitude was safer, that love was too dangerous to pursue. And yet, here was someone who seemed to see through his walls, someone who wasn't afraid to ask the hard questions. He found himself wondering what it would be like to let someone in, to trust, to share even a small part of his life with another person. They spent the rest of the afternoon working together, sharing small stories and learning about each other. She spoke about her life in the town, her love for nature, and her curiosity about farming. Ahmed, usually reserved and quiet, found himself opening up in small ways, talking about his work, his routines, and even the simple joys he found in the rhythm of farm life. By the time the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the fields, Ahmed felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: connection. Her presence had stirred something in him, a sense of curiosity and hope that he had long suppressed. He realized that perhaps there was more to life than solitude, more to his heart than fear. As they packed up their tools and prepared to leave the fields, she looked at him with a warm smile. "Thank you for letting me help today," she said. "I've learned so much and I've enjoyed your company." Ahmed nodded, feeling a strange mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. I'm glad you came," he said quietly. She tilted her head slightly, her eyes meeting his with a gentle intensity. "Ahmed," she said softly, "remember my question from yesterday, fear of love or fear of loss?" Ahmed felt the weight of those words settle over him again. He didn't have an answer yet, not fully. But for the first time in years, he felt a desire to explore the possibility, to consider what life could be like if he allowed himself to open up, even just a little. As she walked back toward the village, Ahmed lingered in the field, watching her go. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, the colors reflecting the subtle shift in his own heart. He realized that change was coming, whether he wanted it or not, and that the first step would be acknowledging the feelings he had long buried. That evening, Ahmed sat by his window, staring at the fields in the fading light. He thought about her laughter, her questions, and the way she had looked at him, not with judgment but with genuine interest. He realized that she had done something no one else had. She had seen him, truly seen him, and had made him consider the possibility of trust and connection once again. As darkness fell and the stars began to twinkle above the village, Ahmed didn't have all the answers. He didn't know if he was ready to embrace love or if he could face the risk of loss. But he knew one thing: his world had shifted, even if just slightly. And for the first time in a long time, he felt a spark of hope, a small flame that promised that perhaps life had more to offer than solitude and routine. And somewhere in the quiet of the night, Ahmed made a silent promise to himself. He would watch, he would observe, and he would consider. Perhaps, just perhaps, he would let this woman into his world, and maybe, just maybe, he would discover that love was worth the risk after all. Ahmed woke up the next morning with a restless feeling he couldn't quite shake. The sun was bright, and the farm looked as calm and familiar as always, yet something inside him felt different. He had spent most of his life avoiding people, keeping his heart protected from the pain he had endured years ago. Yet the memory of the woman, her laughter, her gentle questions, the way she had looked at him without judgment, lingered in his mind like a soft whisper. For the first time in many years, Ahmed wondered what it would be like to let someone see him fully, to share even a small part of his life with another person. The day started like any other. He tended to the animals, checked the irrigation channels, and inspected the crops. Every task felt heavier than usual, not because of physical strain, but because his thoughts kept drifting back to her. He remembered her question from the previous day, fear of love or fear of loss. He didn't know the answer yet. Part of him wanted to laugh and dismiss it. After all, he was a man who had built his life on solitude. But another part of him, a part he had long ignored, stirred uneasily, urging him to consider that perhaps there was something more he was missing. By mid-morning, the woman appeared again. She moved with her usual calm confidence, carrying a small basket of vegetables she had gathered from other farms in the area. Her presence brought an unexpected warmth to the air. Ahmed tried to focus on his work, feeding the animals and arranging the freshly collected vegetables, but he couldn't help noticing the ease with which she carried herself. She didn't try to impress him, nor did she fawn over his work. She simply observed, asked questions, and occasionally laughed softly at something small and ordinary, making the mundane tasks feel lighter. "Good morning, Ahmed," she said, setting her basket down on the edge of the field. "May I help you today?" Ahmed hesitated. In the past, he would have politely refused. He had always valued his independence and solitude above all else, but something in her tone, her calm and genuine approach made him pause. Finally, he nodded. "Yes. You can help with feeding the animals today," he said, his voice quieter than usual. As they worked together, she asked about each animal, listening intently as Ahmed explained their habits, preferences, and quirks. Her questions were thoughtful, not just idle curiosity. She wanted to understand, to learn, and Ahmed found himself answering without overthinking, speaking openly about something he had never shared with anyone outside his family. She smiled, noticing the pride in his voice. "You really care about them," she said softly. "It's not just work for you, is it?" Ahmed looked down, unsure of how to respond. It was true. Farming was his life, but it was also his passion. The animals, the soil, the rhythm of planting and harvesting, they were all part of him. For years, he had kept this part of himself to himself, afraid that letting someone in would make him vulnerable. Yet here was someone who noticed, who seemed to value it without judgment. As the day went on, the woman remained close, helping when she could, listening when he spoke, and occasionally offering quiet insights about the work they were doing. Her presence was comforting, yet it challenged him in ways he wasn't prepared for. He realized that her attention stirred feelings he had long suppressed: curiosity, interest, and even a tentative sense of trust. He tried to push them away, reminding himself of the heartbreak he had endured in the past. But the more he tried to distance himself, the more he noticed the subtle ways her presence affected him. During a break, they sat under the shade of a large tree at the edge of the field. She handed him some water, and he accepted it, grateful for the gesture. The silence between them was easy, not awkward, filled with the gentle sounds of the farm, the distant bleating of goats, the soft rustling of leaves, and the occasional bird song. He felt a rare sense of calm, as if the world had slowed down just enough for him to notice it. "I've been thinking about your question," he said finally, his voice low and hesitant. "About love and loss." She looked at him, her eyes calm and encouraging. "And?" she asked, not pressing, just waiting. Ahmed took a deep breath. "I've been hurt before, a long time ago. It made me afraid. Afraid to let anyone in, afraid that if I love someone, I'll lose them and the pain will be too much to bear." She nodded thoughtfully, as if she understood more than the words conveyed. "That makes sense," she said softly. "But sometimes, by avoiding love, we also avoid happiness. The risk is real, yes, but the reward can be worth it." Ahmed remained silent, thinking. She wasn't trying to force him to answer or push him into something he wasn't ready for. She simply offered a perspective, a gentle nudge toward something he had long denied himself. He realized that her presence was challenging his carefully constructed walls. She made him question not only his fear of loss, but also his fear of experiencing joy and connection. They spent the afternoon tending to the fields together, harvesting vegetables and repairing fences. As they worked, she asked about his life beyond the farm, about his childhood, his family, and his memories. Ahmed found himself sharing small stories, some amusing, some poignant. He spoke about his father teaching him to plant seeds in neat rows, about his mother showing him how to care for the animals, about the small joys of watching the sun rise over the fields. Each story, though simple, revealed a part of him he had never shown to anyone else. She listened carefully, asking questions that encouraged him to elaborate, to reflect, and to connect with the feelings he had long ignored. Her patience and attentiveness made him feel seen, truly seen, in a way that no one else had managed. For the first time, Ahmed felt that it might be safe to lower his guard, even just slightly, and consider the possibility of trust. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the fields in shades of gold and orange, Ahmed and the woman paused to admire the view. The air was warm but gentle, carrying the scent of earth and freshly harvested crops. He felt a quiet sense of peace, tempered by the unfamiliar flutter of emotions he had been trying to ignore. "Ahmed," she said softly, turning to him, "you don't have to answer my question yet, but I want you to think about it. Fear of love or fear of loss? It's okay to feel both, but it's also okay to let yourself feel something new." He nodded slowly, unsure of how to respond. Her words weren't pushing him. They were inviting him to reflect, to explore, and to consider the possibility that life could offer more than solitude and caution. As they walked back toward the village, Ahmed noticed the villagers preparing for the evening celebrations. Children were laughing, couples were talking quietly, and the aroma of freshly baked bread and roasted meat filled the air. He realized he had been so focused on keeping his heart safe that he had overlooked the beauty of simple connections, the laughter of a child, the smile of a neighbor, the joy of sharing even a small moment with someone else. The woman waved goodbye as she headed to the village square. "See you tomorrow," she said, smiling warmly. Ahmed watched her walk away, a strange mixture of anticipation and apprehension settling in his chest. For the first time in years, he didn't feel complete certainty about keeping his distance. Instead, he felt curiosity, a desire to see her again, to learn more, and perhaps to take the first small step towards something he had long avoided: connection, trust, and maybe even love. That night, Ahmed sat by the window of his modest home, staring at the moon rising over the fields. He reflected on the day, on the quiet moments, the shared laughter, and the gentle words that had begun to stir something deep within him. He realized that the woman had done more than just ask a question. She had challenged him to look inward, to confront the fears he had carried for so long, and to consider the possibility that life could be richer and fuller if he allowed himself to experience it. As he drifted to sleep, he couldn't shake the thought that his life might be changing. The farm, the fields, and the animals were still his world, but now there was room for something new, a presence, a connection, and the subtle, yet undeniable, pull of curiosity and hope. For the first time in a long time, Ahmed felt that perhaps he could open his heart, even just a little, and see where it might lead. And somewhere in the quiet of the night beneath the stars, Ahmed made a silent promise to himself. He would watch, he would reflect, and he would consider. Perhaps love was not something to fear entirely, and perhaps the risk of loss was not as great as the possibility of missing something beautiful. The morning began quietly, with the sun rising over the fields and a soft breeze rustling the leaves. Ahmed was already up, checking on the animals and making sure the irrigation channels were running smoothly. It was his usual routine, but there was a subtle change in him. He felt a quiet anticipation, a restlessness he hadn't experienced in years. The woman had promised to visit again, and for the first time Ahmed looked forward to seeing her, wondering what the day might bring. By mid-morning, dark clouds began to gather in the sky. The air grew heavy and damp, carrying the distant scent of rain. Ahmed paused to look at the horizon, frowning slightly. The villagers had mentioned that storms were common this time of year, but they could be dangerous for the crops. He quickly inspected the fields, checking the irrigation channels and making sure that the young plants were protected as best as he could. Just then, he saw her approaching. She moved with calm confidence, carrying a small bundle of herbs she had picked from nearby fields. Despite the looming storm, her steps were steady, her eyes bright with curiosity and kindness. Ahmed felt a flutter in his chest, a mix of excitement and worry. He knew that the weather could make the day difficult, but he also knew that he wanted her to stay. "Ahmed," she called softly as she reached the edge of the field. "It looks like a storm is coming. Do you need help?" He shook his head. "Yes, I could use your help. The crops and the animals need attention before it hits." They began working together, moving quickly through the fields. Ahmed guided her, showing her how to reinforce the fences and cover the delicate plants. She listened carefully, following his instructions with precision and eagerness. Despite the rush, there was a quiet harmony between them, a rhythm that made the hard work feel less tiring. For Ahmed, this was new. He had spent so many years working alone, relying only on himself. Yet in her presence, the work felt lighter, and even the approaching storm seemed less daunting. As the wind began to pick up, carrying the first drops of rain, Ahmed realized that the situation required more urgent action. He hurried to gather the animals, guiding them to safer areas of the barn. She followed closely, helping to secure the doors and make sure the smaller animals were safe. The storm was growing stronger by the minute, with sudden gusts of wind bending the trees and heavy rain beginning to fall. They took shelter inside the barn, the animals calm but restless around them. The air was thick with the smell of hay, earth, and rain. Ahmed's heart was pounding, partly from the exertion, partly from the situation, and partly from the woman standing next to him. He realized that in the midst of the storm he felt an unusual sense of connection, a silent understanding that they were facing this challenge together. She looked at him with concern. "Ahmed, this is intense. Are you sure everything is okay?" He nodded, though his voice was calm but firm. "Yes, we've done what we can for now. The animals are safe and the crops are mostly protected. Now we wait." The barn was quiet except for the sound of rain pounding on the roof and the occasional call of the animals. Ahmed and the woman sat on a bale of hay, catching their breath and listening to the storm. There was a tension in the air, both from the weather and from the emotions that had been quietly building between them over the past days. Finally, she spoke softly. "Ahmed, may I ask you something personal?" He looked at her, curious but cautious. "Of course," he said. She hesitated for a moment, then asked, "Why do you keep people at a distance? I mean, really at a distance?" Ahmed took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her question. He thought about the years he had spent alone, the heartbreak that had shaped him, and the careful walls he had built around his heart. For a long time, he had believed that solitude was safer, that love was too risky. But now, in the quiet of the barn with the storm raging outside, he realized he could no longer avoid the truth. "I've been hurt before," he said quietly. "A long time ago. I trusted someone and it ended badly. Since then, I've been afraid. Afraid that if I let someone in, I'll lose them and the pain will be too much to bear." She listened without interrupting, her eyes calm and understanding. "I understand," she said softly, "but hiding from love doesn't protect you. It only keeps you from experiencing something beautiful." Ahmed looked at her, really looked at her, and felt a sudden, overwhelming sense of vulnerability. No one had ever spoken to him this way before. No one had ever made him consider the possibility that he could trust again, that he could allow himself to be seen fully. His hands, rough and calloused from years of farm work, felt strangely unsteady as he reached out to adjust a loose rope on the barn wall. They sat in silence for a while, the storm outside acting as a backdrop to the quiet intensity between them. Ahmed realized that this moment, shared in the middle of a storm, was more meaningful than any conversation he had had in years. She had created a space where he could be honest without fear, where he could acknowledge the pain of the past while also considering the possibility of a different future. The rain continued to fall, soaking the barn in a rhythmic, steady sound. Ahmed felt a sudden surge of gratitude toward her, not just for her presence, but for the way she had approached him with patience, respect, and genuine curiosity. He realized that for the first time, he didn't feel the need to hide. He didn't need to protect himself from judgment or disappointment. She wasn't pressuring him. She was simply there, offering understanding and quiet encouragement. Eventually, the intensity of the storm lessened, though the sky remained overcast and the ground wet and muddy. Ahmed and the woman worked together to check the fields and ensure that nothing had been damaged. There were some fallen branches and a few plants affected by the heavy rain, but overall, the farm had survived the storm with minimal damage. As they finished, the woman turned to him and smiled. "You handled that very well, Ahmed. I can see why the villagers respect you so much. You care for this land and the life it supports." Ahmed felt a small smile form on his lips. "It's just what I know," he said softly. "I've spent my life here. This is all I've ever known." She reached out and lightly touched his arm, a simple gesture that carried warmth and reassurance. "And yet, you've let me in even just a little. That takes courage." Ahmed looked at her, feeling emotions he hadn't allowed himself to acknowledge for years. The fear of loss was still there, a quiet shadow in his mind, but it was accompanied by a new feeling, a tentative hope, a curiosity about what life could be like if he allowed himself to trust again. He realized that the walls he had built were not unbreakable. They could be softened and perhaps even lowered completely if he was willing to take the risk. As they walked back toward the village, the storm had passed, leaving a fresh, clean smell in the air. The sun peeked through the clouds, casting a warm glow over the wet fields. Ahmed felt a subtle shift within him, a realization that the storm outside had mirrored the storm inside. He had faced not only the elements but also the walls he had built around his heart, and for the first time, he felt the possibility of change. That evening, as he sat alone in his small wooden house, Ahmed reflected on the day. He thought about the storm, the work they had done together, and the quiet moments in the barn where he had shared his fears. He realized that he had taken the first steps towards something he had long avoided: connection, trust, and the possibility of love. The woman had shown him that it was not only possible to open his heart, but that doing so could bring strength, comfort, and even joy. Ahmed didn't know what the future held, and he didn't know if he was ready to fully embrace it yet. But he did know that something inside him had shifted. The fear of loss was still present, but it no longer dominated his thoughts. There was room now for curiosity, for hope, and for the small, quiet beginnings of trust. And somewhere in the night, as the stars began to twinkle above the village, Ahmed made a silent promise to himself. He would take things one step at a time. He would allow himself to be seen, to share, and perhaps to experience the possibility of love again. The storm had passed, both outside and within, leaving a sense of clarity and quiet courage that he hadn't felt in years. Spring arrived quietly in the village, bringing warmth, gentle breezes, and a new sense of life to the fields. The crops were green and thriving, the animals healthy and lively, and the farm hummed with the rhythm of daily work. For Ahmed, this spring was unlike any other. The memory of the woman who had come into his life lingered in his mind, bringing with it a feeling he had not allowed himself to experience in years: hope. The harvest festival had ended weeks ago, but her presence continued to fill his thoughts. He found himself looking forward to her visits, the conversations they shared, and the quiet comfort she brought into his world. He no longer felt the same walls pressing around his heart. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, those walls had begun to lower, making space for connection, trust, and something new that had been absent for so long. One morning, as Ahmed tended to the crops, he saw her walking along the path leading to his farm, carrying a small basket of freshly picked herbs. She smiled brightly, and for a moment, Ahmed felt his chest tighten with a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. The feeling was new, unfamiliar, yet welcome. He had spent so many years avoiding this exact sensation, and now he realized how much he had been missing. "Good morning, Ahmed," she called softly, her voice carrying across the fields. He returned her greeting, his voice steadier than he expected. "Good morning. I'm glad to see you." They spent the day together, moving through the fields, tending to crops and caring for the animals. Their work was not rushed or pressured. It was shared, collaborative, and filled with moments of laughter and light conversation. Ahmed found himself enjoying her company in ways he had never imagined. She didn't rush him, didn't demand explanations, and didn't judge his past. She simply shared her time, her curiosity, and her warmth. As the day went on, Ahmed realized that the farm, his life, and his work had taken on a new meaning. They were no longer just routines. They were opportunities to share, to connect, and to create memories with someone who understood and appreciated them. The woman had shown him that life could be richer, that love could exist alongside labor and responsibility, and that it was possible to open one's heart without fear consuming it entirely. That evening, they walked together to the edge of the fields, where the sun was beginning to set. The sky was painted with shades of gold, orange, and soft pink, reflecting off the green of the crops and the gentle curves of the landscape. Ahmed felt a quiet sense of peace, mixed with an unfamiliar anticipation. He realized that he wanted more than her presence in his life. He wanted to share himself, his thoughts, and his future with her. She turned to him, smiling gently. "Ahmed," she said softly, "I've enjoyed every moment I've spent here. You've shown me so much, not just about farming, but about life, patience, and resilience." Ahmed felt his chest tighten. He wanted to speak, to tell her everything he had been feeling, but the words seemed inadequate. Instead, he nodded, letting the silence between them convey what he could not yet say aloud. The connection they shared, the trust that had grown over days of shared labor and quiet conversations, was already profound. For the first time, Ahmed allowed himself to reflect on the question she had asked from the very beginning: fear of love or fear of loss? He thought about the years he had spent avoiding attachment, the nights filled with loneliness, and the moments when he had longed for connection but pushed it away out of fear. He realized now that the fear of loss had kept him from experiencing the beauty of love and companionship. He understood that embracing love also meant embracing vulnerability, but it also meant embracing joy, hope, and shared life. As the days turned into weeks, Ahmed and the woman continued to spend time together. They worked side by side in the fields, shared meals, and walked along the paths surrounding the farm. Their conversations deepened, moving from simple observations about crops and animals to dreams, hopes, and reflections on life. Ahmed began to share his thoughts openly, speaking of his past heartbreak, his fears, and the lessons he had learned from years of solitude. She listened patiently, offering encouragement and understanding without judgment. The villagers began to notice the change in Ahmed. The man who had once been solitary and reserved was now seen smiling, laughing, and interacting with the woman in a natural, comfortable way. Some whispered about the transformation, others simply admired the quiet happiness that had entered his life. Ahmed paid little attention to the gossip. His focus was on the moments he shared with her, and the bond that continued to grow stronger with each passing day. One afternoon, after a long day of work in the fields, Ahmed and the woman sat together on the edge of the farm, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky was alive with color, and the air was filled with the gentle sounds of evening, the chirping of birds, the rustling of leaves, and the distant calls of animals settling in for the night. "Ahmed," she said softly, turning to him, "I've noticed a change in you. You seem lighter, more open. What has brought this change?" Ahmed smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that reached his eyes. "It's you," he said simply. "You've shown me that it's possible to trust, to share, and to allow someone into my life without fear consuming me. You've helped me see that love is not something to be afraid of, even if there is a risk of loss." She reached out and took his hand, a small gesture that carried warmth, comfort, and reassurance. "And what do you feel now?" she asked, her eyes searching his. Ahmed took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment and the depth of his emotions. "I feel hope," he said softly. "I feel that life can be more than routine, more than solitude. I feel that there is space in my heart for connection, for trust, and for love." For the first time, Ahmed allowed himself to embrace the possibility fully. The fear of loss was no longer the driving force of his decisions. Instead, he chose to focus on the joy of shared moments, the warmth of companionship, and the potential for a future filled with care, understanding, and love. From that day forward, Ahmed and the woman continued to build their life together on the farm. They shared responsibilities, laughter, and quiet moments of reflection. The farm, once a symbol of solitude, became a space of partnership and trust. Ahmed found joy in sharing his life, his work, and his heart with someone who valued him for who he truly was. The seasons continued to change, each bringing new challenges and rewards. Ahmed no longer feared the storms, the hardships, or the uncertainties of life, because he knew that facing them with someone he trusted made them easier to bear. He learned that vulnerability was not weakness, but a strength, and that opening his heart allowed him to experience a richness in life he had long denied himself. One evening, as the sun set and the fields glowed in warm light, Ahmed and the woman walked hand in hand, feeling the gentle breeze on their faces. The air was filled with the scent of blooming flowers and freshly tilled soil. Ahmed looked at her, truly looked, and felt a deep sense of gratitude. He realized that the question she had asked him months ago, fear of love or fear of loss, had led him to a profound understanding. He had chosen love, not because it was easy, but because it was worth the risk. He knew that life would continue to bring challenges, moments of uncertainty, and the possibility of pain. But he also knew that with her by his side, he could face anything. Love, trust, and connection had transformed his life, filling the spaces that had once been empty with warmth, joy, and meaning. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Ahmed felt a sense of peace he had never known. The farm, the animals, and the work he loved remained central to his life, but now they were accompanied by a presence that made each day brighter, each task lighter, and each moment more meaningful. In the quiet of the night, Ahmed held her hand tightly, reflecting on the journey that had brought him here, from years of solitude and fear to the courage to open his heart. He smiled, knowing that he had made a choice that would shape the rest of his life. And in that moment, standing together beneath the stars, Ahmed understood fully that the greatest reward often comes when we face our fears, take risks, and allow ourselves to embrace love and connection. He had chosen love, and it had changed everything.